Welcome back to another Agenty Digital podcast. Today I'm pleased to have Taylor Pierce from Sidekick Security. Taylor, it's great to have you here today.
Nikhil, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to diving in.
So, Taylor, tell me more about kind of your backstory, because you spent about, 15 years on the vendor side of application security. You went through 3 acquisitions. And so kind of what was the moment where you decided you'd rather, build your own consultancy than actually keep selling for one?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great question. And for better or for worse, it begins many, many moons ago. So my dad actually is a serial entrepreneur. He started, 2 different companies kind of over his career. So I definitely had that kind of entrepreneurial bug and interest in starting my own company from a very young age. And then my first job out of college, I just ended up at this company called Digital, and it was an amazing place to work. And I was there for about 5 years and worked very closely with my now, co-founder and partner in Sidekick, Robert Wood. We used to travel a bunch and work very closely together. And we used to just kind of talk about we'd love to start our own company one day. And that was back in like 2012, 2013. And I continued down the path of wanting to grow into sales leadership. And Robert went down the security practitioner path and was a CISO for 2 different technology companies, and then the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we had remained close friends, but the stars kind of aligned, last year, and we decided, hey, do you want to start a company? Right? It only gets harder every year that passes, and you get further down the road in your career. And yeah, I think it's something that I would have regretted later in life, never kind of taken the chance and really trying to do something cool for ourselves. And then also, we started the company in kind of the post chat GPT AI, era.
Yeah.
It opened an opportunity for us to, build a security consulting firm, which we both had, spent years working in, together back at Digital, but then, me leading go-to-market teams at consultancies and Robert buying consulting services, in his roles. And, we could take a business that we knew very well, but then we were very intentional about building it in a different kind of way, right? And leveraging AI to, internally to drive efficiency and automation in our processes. So we don't have to have kind of that big layer of overhead that a lot of consulting firms have, around project management, scheduling and resource management, sales, and all the kind of thought leadership content. All of that, we saw an opportunity to do it fundamentally kind of differently. And then certainly externally for our customers, there's incredible things you can do with AI tools to just provide higher value offerings at the same price point, or break down some of the barriers that are common in kind of application and offensive security when you're limited to kind of just that very tight scope of work in an SOW, right? Can be tedious to just engage and work with consulting firms from just a paperwork and scoping standpoint. And we've really tried to smooth a lot of that, with Sidekick.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me more about Sidekick, perhaps for listeners that might not know you guys?
Definitely.
What are you guys best at?
Yeah, so we are a cybersecurity advisory and engineering company. And so the way that we think about our business is 4 main pillars. We have AI security, where we will test tools or products that have AI in them for things like prompt injection. We also do a lot of work helping people build AI governance programs. A lot of companies are in this mad rush to adopt and use AI, but they struggle with building like the security strategy around it and the guardrails that are needed to do it in a secure way. And we can help people, very quickly get those in place so that they can adopt AI as fast as they would like, but they have confidence that, their data, their customers' data, and the expected behaviors of their products or operations are going to be intact. We also do program transformation, which is kind of the second pillar, which is more traditional kind of program benchmarking, maturity assessments, compliance readiness if you need like your SOC 2 or something. We have an offensive security practice, which does a lot of different types of penetration testing, code review, and advanced red team operations. And then last, but certainly not least, we have VSEC, which is kind of our take on staff augmentation or kind of these vCISO type arrangements. Whereas instead of like one person, with one kind of skill set, we come in and understand, who are the personnel at a company, what tools they have, existing processes and maybe gaps, and then what are their aspirations for the next 18 months, whether it be compliance or building capabilities in house or deploying, specific tools. And once we know all of that, we onboard 3 team members, a security leader kind of persona, a security engineer, and then a privacy and GRC specialist. So across those 3, we kind of expertise across the gamut, right? So we can just work with them to execute the strategy that they have in place, or just be a kind of a virtual extension of their team where they can write us in Slack and say, hey, we got this vendor due diligence questionnaire, or we're thinking about changing how we do authentication in our application. What are the things we need to consider? Or would this approach be, secure? And we just jump in and do the work or answer the question. And there's not like kind of well, it's going to cost this much, or, it takes 3 weeks just to get a statement of work. Our team is just there and ready to jump in. And it's progress, not PDFs is kind of our mantra there.
How big is Sidekick now?
Sidekick is, I believe, 15 people strong today.
Okay.
And we've grown, I think in the beginning of 2025, I think we had 4 full-time employees. So we've added a bunch over the past kind of year and a half. And then we have a great network of contractors that we regularly, work with that kind of have specialties in like applied cryptography or AI or hardware penetration testing, and kind of specialized skill sets that we can bring in and they can help our clients.
Yeah. Actually, before we started this podcast, what seemed to interest me is that as a CEO, you don't have a sales team. And so how does your typical week looks like, and what are you personally doing that like a VP of sales would be doing at any other security firm?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So when we bootstrapped Sidekick, so we didn't take any funding. We both put like $5,000 in a bucket to get started. And sales and marketing is expensive, right? And it can be very wasteful, right? Like, as you well know, like lead generation and field marketing and hiring good salespeople isn't cheap. And cybersecurity is a very trust and kind of relationship driven industry, just given the nature of the work. So from the very beginning, we were intentional about trying to be as kind of partner and channel first as we could possibly be, and then creating a program that we call a syndicate, which is a network of of people that may be security practitioners. They could be CISOs, they could be salespeople at companies that aren't competitive but are in the same conversation space, and we pay them a commission whenever they make an introduction for us, right? So it's, let's say you're a sales rep selling a static analysis tool. As part of that application security, secure SDL conversation, asking what do you do for pen testing is not a very distant topic from the current one. And if they're looking to make a change or they don't have a pen testing partner, they can just offer to make an introduction to to Sidekick. And if they do that and it goes somewhere, they get a check in the mail. And that's been a huge driver for our growth. And for us, it makes it really easy to manage, from a cost standpoint, but a time standpoint, right? We can do case studies and briefings on new service offerings and just send them to that group of people, which is, I think it's 27 folks now. We have like a monthly call where we can talk about what's working or answer questions. And so you focus on that one kind of community, all your sales enablement efforts and your updates and, your wins and your losses. And, then they go out and, you know, help us grow. So
Yeah, that's very smart. So you're basically like leveraging other networks.
yeah, exactly. People who are in the conversation, in the industry, they have their own relationships, they have trust with these, with people, and they can make the right introductions at the right time. Right. And, you don't have to scroll very long on LinkedIn to see, some post or some blog or some, angry statement around how much spam people get, right? Like the Black Hat security conferences this week and in the lead up to that, saw a lot of people saying like, I've gotten 30 calls today, right? About grabbing a
Yeah.
dinner or going to play top golf or whatnot. And, that's just, it's annoying, right? And it's kind of the nature of the beast. You kind of have to do it as a big company, but
Uh,
it's definitely not ideal from the vendor standpoint. The cost that goes into, $300 a lead is not crazy, but then for clients, it's noisy, right? So if we can, have a first introduction to a company and it's not coming from, hey, thanks for hopping on. I know I called you 9 times, and it's more, Will, and, it's already kind of a personal and kind of trust-based conversation or introduction. And that's certainly
yeah.
the best first impression that we want to have.
Yeah, it's very true. I feel like whenever go and scroll LinkedIn, everyone is saying, do more automation, more emails, more AI generated personalization.
Yeah.
But I think like people miss the point of personalization. Like me writing you that you have a nice toothbrush doesn't help both of us, or neither you or me, get closer or understand your situation more or be more trustworthy. So yeah, talk to me more about the use of AI, because you seem to have a lot, some AI use cases. So where do you currently use AI in Sidekick?
We, we use it everywhere that we can, and that, we're confident in the security of it. From a internal standpoint, it's great for, we can capture, for managers, we have an agent that, can take, call reviews and Slack exchanges and, kind of a knowledge base with people's current skills matrix and their ambitions for their next role or growth areas. And it can, it basically serves as like a coach towards that kind of North Star of where they want to go with their career. We also use it in not a very sexy way, but one of the challenges with the consulting is resource management, right? Like who's on projects and who's available 2 weeks from now. And you have to layer in people's skills. Not everybody can do everything. And so, at prior companies, we'd spend 2 hours a week with all the stakeholders imaginable, just talking about the schedule. This project's going to go here. I need someone for, August 18th start. And it was this a very labor and time intensive process. And so we've got a cloud agent that just sits on top of our schedule and lives or the kind of Kanban we have in Asana. And so you can just go on Slack and say, when's our next availability for an AI governance project? And it just spits it out. And so we don't have
Wow.
to have a resourcing call. Another one is writing SOWs and proposals, right? We can feed it, call recordings or meeting notes or scoping documents, and it will just generate a statement of work for us. And that was another area that, in the pre-AI world, I'd spend hours, and every salesperson, on the team would spend hours writing SOWs and proposals. And so that's been a huge benefit for us, internally. And then, externally in our service offerings, there's a lot that we can do that's additive. And a penetration test, for example, typically doesn't cover like the design, like an architectural design or threat model of an application. It also doesn't always include a mapping to like your detection response capabilities or your compliance, requirements. And we've built, AI into our delivery process. So now when you do a pen test, you also are getting a secure design review and understanding, if you have architectural flaws in your system. Then we do the pen test, and then in the report, we'll take the findings and map them to, WAF rules or, configuration changes in your, EDR, and then the implications of vulnerabilities to your compliance frameworks. And it just levels up, you get more value from the pen test, you learn more about your environment, and it makes, something like a pen test, which is usually a very tactical kind of check the box exercise, and it frames it against a much richer and broader backdrop. So more people in the organization get value from that, beyond just like, we found 5 bugs.
Yeah.
And there's several other examples, in our service offerings where we can do that. So
Mm. Yeah, very strong use cases. Like I really like the proposal one because it's always been such a hassle, especially when you're starting out, right? You have very limited resources and you can just fed the transcripts and it just
yeah,
basically does 90%. It's 90% there. So
right.
yeah, that's great. But yeah, I want to ask you, Sidekick runs on like 4 principles, and I would like to know, where did progress over PDFs come from? And if you could talk more about what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think and I definitely felt it as a vendor, and then Rob did as well. And then he saw it as someone buying, millions of dollars of consulting. And you hear it, consultants kind of get a bad rap, right? Because they come in, they talk about stuff at a high level, and then you get a 50-slide presentation or you get a 100-page PDF, and like, that's it, right? And a lot of times that leaves clients, wanting, right? And we, you know, we don't want to do that. We don't want to perpetuate that, that outcome. So, we are very, very focused on, just get in and get shit done, right? Like, make progress. Let's not, make a PDF or a PowerPoint the capstone of our delivery, right? We want our customers to fear the day that Sidekick goes away, right? Like, we want to provide that much value to them and benefit and take the tasks that they hate doing off of their plate and just, you know, come in and have a real impact. And yeah, I think that's the way that we've done that is, and it took some time to figure out, what did we feel like was kind of forced consultant stuff in kind of the customer life cycle and journey, and what the customers actually value, right? So we certainly don't want to be ghosts. We want them to see and know our faces. We want them to feel like we have great communication and they're in the loop with how things are going in their projects. But we found that most customers would prefer that to be like a short Slack message, not some email with a weekly brief attachment and a request to review it for 10 minutes together, And so making sure that that kind of white glove, very personalized, very communicative experience stays intact, but then strip away all of the kind of forced structure and formality that, I think comes with a lot of times when you engage, consultants. Yeah.
You
So
and Rob actually came at opposite sides, right? He was buyer managing consultancies at CMS, and you were the vendor, as you said. So what's kind of like one of the biggest mistakes that you see security leaders make when they go out and actually hire a consultancy?
uh, hmm, I think there's probably a couple, if I may. Yeah, I think
Sure.
sometimes organizations come, they do their research and they're prepared and they kind of come to that first conversation saying like, this is what we want. And sometimes they're spot on and that makes it really easy. There's other times where I think you could frame it differently and expand the scope or take a different, approach to reviewing a system or, again, to use a pen testing example, it's like, we want our web application tested, but we don't want the backend APIs and the cloud infrastructure that's hosted in. to be a part of the scope. And from a risk standpoint, those are critical components of the attack surface of that app, right? So sure, we can come in and do just the web application, but we're really not going to give you a full picture of like what your risks are in that system. So I would say, doing your homework and knowing what you want and having that documentation is fantastic, but also, having some flexibility and being receptive to, your, potential consulting partner is recommending without just kind of being defensive and thinking it's like an upsell attempt is a big one that's ultimately going to lead, can lead to a much better outcome. I think the other one is like hiring too many consultants, right? Like I think consulting is a people business, and the more you can consolidate and work with a smaller group of vendors of any kind, but certainly consultancies, so that the consultants learn your environment and your people, and that makes them better at what they do and more efficient, and it ultimately costs less to the customer. And giving them the scope that allows them to really be a strategic partner because they understand your application security program better than, many people who work in the organization, right? Because they have visibility
Mhm.
across different teams and of all the tools and all that good stuff. I think that's another big opportunity that a lot of times isn't considered.
Mm. I know Sidekick, it's still in the early days, but would you do anything differently if you would be starting today?
No, I don't think I would. I think it's going, it's
Mm?
certainly in the early innings. It's going really well. I mean, one of the things that we did when we first started, you know, AI tools weren't where they were today. And so we used a tool called N8N that was kind
Yeah,
of one of the early tools that allowed you to kind of build agentic workflows. And we had
yeah.
all this crazy N8N projects and workflows. And, they were great, but they did take time to kind of maintain. And, you know, and it also was difficult to get everyone in the company like into N8N and kind of sharing those
Mm,
workflows. And so we struggled with that for like probably a year. And then Claude got so good and kind of built in more features that we we canceled our subscriptions with like 6 different point AI tools. And now we are, kind of exclusively on Claude. And that's been a game changer for us. We can,
yeah.
we meetings to share, you know, uh, you know, cool things that people are building. And we have a skills library and plugins. And every time Claude has a new release, somebody checks it out. And we schedule a little like 15-minute huddle and they can just share with everybody how it works, what it does, opportunities that could be applied to, internally or externally. And so that's just really helped keep everybody aligned around one tool and people getting progressively, better and deeper in their skill set and using it. And it also makes it easier to, protect and make sure that we're using it securely.
Yeah, yeah. I used N8N too, kind of before Claude Code, and I feel like nowadays we are more and more moving from UI.
Yeah.
Like basically 90% can be done in the terminal, and I think also like all of the new apps and startups are starting to build more like MCPs and APIs, and I think UI will disappear in
Yeah.
the future. What do you think?
I I agree. Or it'll change to be much it'll change to be a different type of UI. But like I was an English major in college, like furthest thing from a software engineer. But I use Claude Code, right? And it really isn't that hard, right? And I can always
Mm,
even in call, in the terminal, just say, here's what I'm trying to do. How do we get after it? And it leads me in the right direction. I don't have to have like a note sheet of how to change directories or all the little
mm,
shortcuts that are in terminal that non-technical people typically, that's like the first hurdle is like, what do I do in this thing, right? And Cloud Code just removes that barrier. And then when you spend enough time in it and you go back to like even the Claude, kind of chat, I guess it's like Claude.com, it kind of feels like oven mitts a little bit. because you're
Yeah.
you're limited in what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think UI as a whole is very slow. You have to click around when you can just speak to Claude and it can just do the
Yeah,
thing.
def-
90% of the time it's good.
yeah,
The other 10% it screws up, but it's getting much better.
definitely.
How does Sidekick, in the future look like? What's kind of on the horizon for you guys in terms of growth?
Yeah. So I think, what we've been, doing more and more of this year and where we want to get to is kind of that, new term or, service as software, right? So the conversation with customers not being figuring out how we're going to do the work and what that approach and methodology is going to look like, but just talking about what's the outcome you're trying to achieve. Like what is the final product or the workflow or the outputs, and then you know, building automated processes and building little products that just deliver that for a customer, right? So, like if a common thing in cybersecurity is a risk register, right? Something you use to track all of the different compliance or security risks. And there's massive enterprise tools that are great for that. But many companies, especially kind of mid market, they don't need all the bells and whistles of a enterprise leading risk register platform. They just need something that's a little bit better than Excel, which is what they're doing it in today. So we have a client that was going to spend $110,000, I believe, on a enterprise GRC platform as their risk register. We were able to build a risk register for them in a week and a half that certainly didn't do everything that the enterprise tool does, but it did everything that they needed it to do. Right. And now, we delivered that, and now our team via the VSEC manages that whole process. So the customer doesn't have to buy tools. They don't have to, onboard multiple vendors. They don't have to figure out who on their team is going to be the admin for this new tool. They're just getting a risk register delivered to them that they can access. They don't have to maintain it. It's always up to date. And, if we go away, they still have the risk register. Their team just manages it. Right. And I think that's where the industry is kind of going. And, we definitely want to be a part of that kind of change of, moving to services and software.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, Taylor, for people that want to check you out or check Sidekick, where can they do so?
Yeah. www.sidekicksecurity.io is the best place to probably start. You can write us at hello@sidekicksecurity.io, or you can write me directly at taylor@sidekicksecurity.io. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor, for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.